Feday.email, you don't need to compromise faith to participate in the modern world. Instead of pushing ads and invasive practices that conflict with Catholic values, we built Feday to reclaim technology for Christendom. When you use Feday.email, you declare your commitment to technology that defends Christian tradition. Join Feday.email today and use technology to advance Christendom.
Over the weekend, a story emerged that makes no sense whatsoever, honestly. The U.S. bishops have decided to double down on the war they've declared on the Trump administration over immigration and funding for Catholic NGOs that do shady work on that front. Or maybe at this point it's tripled down. This has happened so much that you'd actually think the USCCB was a 501c3 political action organization as opposed to the charitable organization that governs the U.S. bishops in North America, or at least in the United States. But these bishops have expanded their focus by taking advantage of the mixed public sentiment over Trump's so-called Big Beautiful Bill, which had most of the provisions his political base supported stripped out of it by the Senate parliamentarian over the weekend. That Senate parliamentarian, by the way, was appointed by a Democratic Senate a few years ago. Now, smelling an opportunity, the bishops have latched onto this mixed bill in order to wage a war to get their funding for migration efforts restored. And the context is weird because I'll briefly remind you of something that made the news a couple of weeks ago, and this is why this story makes no sense. So let's go to Catholic News Agency, who tends to be very measured about these things, with the headline, House launches probe of Catholic non-governmental organizations' role in aiding migrants. All right. So does it seem like it's a good idea to you to go after the people investigating you, basically? To publicly go after them? Probably not the best idea. It seems to be like kicking the hornet's nest to me, especially since these NGOs programs have been extraordinarily unpopular with the general public and rather overtly violate Catholic social teaching because render unto Caesar what is Caesar's. One of the church's main rules in Catholic social teaching is that you're supposed to follow the laws of the government as long as they pertain to the things of Caesar. And controlling who can come into and out of a territory is squarely in the realm of Caesar. That doesn't mean Caesar has the right to treat people like garbage who don't follow that rule. But as a general thing, controlling your country's boundaries belongs to the realm of Caesar. And yet, the U.S. bishops haven't quite figured this out yet. So I want to show you just a little bit here for the context of today's news, because this is, again, utterly ridiculous. This happened reported on June 13th, 2 weeks ago. The U.S. House Committee on Homeland Security and Subcommittee on Oversight Investigations and Accountability have announced the launch of an investigation into more than 200 non-governmental organizations, including 2 major Catholic nonprofits that provided taxpayer-funded services to migrants during the Biden administration. Catholic Charities USA and the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops are among those named in the investigation. According to a June 11th press release, the probe will investigate whether the NGOs, quote, use taxpayer dollars to facilitate illegal activity by migrants who entered the U.S. during the Biden administration. All the NGOs named in the investigation have been sent a letter requesting that they fill out a survey. The letter also expressed concern that some of the NGOs continue to actively advise, quote, those who aren't supposed to be here on how to avoid and impede law enforcement officials, which can only be seen as an attempt to undermine the work of the federal government, end quote. And enforcement of those laws is squarely within the realm of Caesar. And those who come to a new place are told to actually assimilate. According to Catholic teaching, they're supposed to actually respect the laws of where they are. If they're going to be there permanently, to live as the people do. Amazing, because the U.S. bishops tell them not to do those things, violating Catholic social teaching. And nothing says compliance with a formal congressional request, quite like expanding your political war and using the gospel as a shield, which is precisely what they're doing. Last week, the bishops held Religious Freedom Week, and the point of it was explicitly political. Some of the things they were getting the laity to pray for and think about and trying to push the laity's opinion on were good things. Some of them were not. The U.S. bishops issued a press release, and I will show it to you here. It's not so much a press release as it is instructions to the faithful. This is on the USCCB website. Religious Freedom Week 2025, Witnesses to Hope. Religious freedom allows the church and all religious communities to live out their faith in public and to serve the good of all. And that's how they're getting you. Live out their faith in public. We as Catholics are supposed to live out our faith in public. And they're using that for a political purpose. Beginning June 22nd, that was last week, the feasts of St. Thomas More and John Fisher, the USCCB invites Catholics to pray, reflect, and act to promote religious freedom. Let's take a look here. June 22nd, political polarization. Pray that Catholics will have the courage to put the truth of the gospel and fidelity to the church above partisan politics. And it goes after IVF on the next day, June 24th. Pray that governments will respect the consciences of all people who care for the sick and vulnerable, right? It's one of the good ones. So is the IVF one. June 25th, a good one, Nicaragua. Pray for Christians in Nicaragua where the Catholic Church faces brutal government persecution. Again, if you've been following that story, and I've reported on it here in the past, in the Western Hemisphere, that's probably one of the worst places to be in the church right now. June 26th, parental choice in education. Pray that governments would strengthen the ability for parents to direct the education of their children. And the Supreme Court gave them a nice little win on that, like the next day, actually. Here we go to June 27th, immigration services. Pray that the Lord would protect vulnerable migrants and refugees and that the church enjoy the freedom to carry out the ministries that Christ has handed to her. Listen to their rhetoric and you see what they think that means. June 28th, freedom to serve the common good. Pray that government leaders would recognize the contribution that religious charities make to the common good. Again, this was all published after they got that letter saying that their charities are being investigated for illegal activity. June 29th, Nigeria. Pray for our brothers and sisters in Nigeria who are suffering violent religious conflict. Again, a good thing. That's unequivocally good. Got a lot of good with the bad in here because they're framing the bad in good language. Of course, you want the government to lay off the church so the church can do the corporal works of mercy that Christ commanded us to do. Of course, you want that. But what if your shepherds are framing the corporal works of mercy or framing their political activity as the corporal works of mercy, and that thereby just sort of instrumentalizing the gospel, weaponizing it for a political purpose, which is exactly what they've been doing for years. Some, again, those are good, and others are clearly political. But that's not all. You see, the U.S. bishops are openly now declaring their intent to wage political war on the Trump administration. As reported in the New York Times, whose reporting on this does seem, very professional, but there's sort of a gleeful undertone to this. We go to the headline, Catholic bishops try to rally opposition to Trump's immigration agenda. Leading prelates are expressing outrage at the drive towards a large-scale removal. Nice picture of Mass there. Bishop Michael M. Pham of San Diego, who started out, there he is right there in the middle. When he was appointed, people said he's a good one. Everything is fine. Great appointment by Pope Leo XIV. And then within 24 hours of him being the bishop and having taken possession of his see in San Diego, he started running his mouth about secular politics. Hopefully that's not a sign of more of what the future appointments will look like. Let's go over this so you can see some of the details. I'm not going to go over the whole article today. Quote, as the Trump administration escalates its aggressive removal campaign, Roman Catholic bishops across the U.S. are raising objections to the treatment of migrants and challenging the president's policy. For years, many bishops focused their most vocal political engagement on ending the sacrifice to Moloch, rarely putting as much capital behind any other issue. Many supported President Trump's actions to overturn that Supreme Court case and targeted Democratic Catholic politicians who supported access to the sacrifice. But now they are increasingly invoking Pope Leo XIV's leadership and Pope Francis's legacy against Mr. Trump's immigration actions and prioritizing humane treatment of immigrants as a top public issue. They are protesting the president's current domestic policy bill in Congress, showing up at court hearings to deter immigration and customs enforcement agents, and urging Catholics and non-Catholics alike to put compassion for humans ahead of political allegiances. The image in Los Angeles and elsewhere of ICE agents seizing people in Costco parking lots and car washes rips the illusion that that's being portrayed, that this is an effort which is focused on those who have committed significant crimes. says Cardinal Robert McElroy, of course, of Washington, in an interview from Rome. Notice how he talked about committed significant crimes. Significant is the key word. Realities are becoming more ominous, he said. It is becoming clearer that this is a wholesale, indiscriminate removal effort aimed at all those who came to the country without papers. Cardinal McElroy, who has frequently spoken against the president's immigration policies, was named the Archbishop of Washington as one of Pope Francis's final major actions in the U.S., reflecting the Vatican's desire to counter the Trump administration's immigration agenda. These arrests are rising sharply, and the organization has a goal to apprehend 3,000 people a day. A very large number of Catholic bishops and religious leaders in general are outraged by the steps which the administration is taking to expel mostly hardworking, good people from the U.S., Cardinal McElroy said. Again, I know that should be surprising. These programs, by the way, are widely popular with the public. They are. Most of the data shows that. People are a little uncomfortable with some of the things you're seeing, and the protests against it are actually fueling public support. This shouldn't surprise anybody, though. The U.S. bishops, though, even stupidly decided to hitch their activist wagons to opposition to Trump's big, beautiful bill, again, which has mixed support among his base and is unpopular with the general public, largely due to media coverage of the bill itself, which has largely omitted that a huge tax increase is coming if it isn't passed. But it also has a lot of really not great stuff in it. And the good stuff in it that was promised was taken out by the Senate parliamentarian, who, by the way, the Senate Majority Leader had the right to fire, but chose not to for some reason. And the Senate Majority Leader now is facing his own primary challenge from Ken Paxton in Texas, and it looks like Paxton might win. Funny how all that works out. The bishops have done the most synodal thing imaginable, though, in their opposition to this bill, because they sense an opportunity. They sense an opportunity because of mixed public reaction. So they think they're going to garner support from the public by doing stuff like this. Headline from our Sunday Visitor. 20 U.S. bishops join interfaith effort opposing the big, beautiful bill. This was posted yesterday on a Sunday on our Sunday Visitor, which is, again, odd, but, such as it is. One of the things that if you started reading the all the analyses of where federal funds were going through USAID, if you saw where that money was going, it was every major and even many of the minor Christian denominations and their NGOs in the U.S. were receiving funding from the government. Lutheran Family Services, Lutheran Charities, Catholic Relief Services. Name one, they pretty much all were receiving this money, including the U.S. bishops. And they've all had their funding taken away, at least on this issue. Some of them have decided, like the Methodists, as I reported to you, have said they are not going to continue their federal contract with the government in the future because of this, for even other services. Shows you where their priorities were. Here are the details of this. The most synodal thing possible. Quote, 20 U.S. Catholic bishops have signed onto an interfaith effort opposing the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, which would enact key provisions of President Donald Trump's legislative agenda on taxes and immigration, calling it a moral failure. The Senate is drafting its version of the budget legislation that House Republicans passed in May under rules that allow it to pass with a simple majority and avoid a filibuster. Trump has called for the Senate to pass the bill by the 4th of July. A letter from more than 40 faith leaders of several faith traditions, made public by Archbishop John C. Wester of Santa Fe, New Mexico on June 26th, urged senators to reject the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. We, the undersigned faith leaders, write to ask for your opposition to H.R. 1, the budget reconciliation legislation currently being considered by the U.S. Senate, the letter said. We believe that the changes made by the U.S. Senate to the legislation are insufficient and do not significantly mitigate its adverse effects. Archbishop Wester was joined by 19 U.S. bishops in signing the letter, told OSV News that they thought it would be, quote, a good idea for faith leaders to come together to express our deep and profound concern about this bill, because it's going to hurt and harm so many people, particularly immigrants and families and those who depend on the government to assist them for their medical needs. This legislation is really violating our Catholic social teaching in terms of preferential option for the poor, welcoming the stranger in our midst, the common good, subsidiarity, he said. It's a very draconian kind of bill that seems to have little or no regard for the people that will be affected by it. The letter objected to the One Big Beautiful Bill Act allocating millions of dollars to the government's mass removal campaign, expressing concern that the campaign would also infringe upon the houses of worship. We have already witnessed a reduction in attendance at many of our religious services in our denominations, as the threat of enforcement has deterred many families from practicing their faith, the letter said. It also objected to severe cuts in health care coverage and food assistance to millions of both low-income citizens and legal residents, including asylum seekers and refugees. It argued those cuts would drive them deeper into poverty. Notice they're not mentioning also that these government services were explicitly allowed for those who weren't here legally to receive taxpayer-funded services. From our various faith perspectives, the moral test of a nation is how it treats the most in need of support. In our view, this legislation will harm the poor and vulnerable in our nation, to the detriment of the common good, the letter said. Its passage would be a moral failure for American society as a whole, end quote. And then it goes over here who all your bishops are. Got Rosansky, Pham of San Diego, John Stowe, of course. You got the Bishop of Yakima, Weissenberger of Detroit. Tobin, Dolan of Phoenix, McElroy, Wester. They're all there. Practically all of them are there. And the ones who aren't named there are still there in spirit with them. But that's what they're doing. Seems like a bad idea to me when you're being investigated by the House of Representatives for using your federal funds to do illegal things. But again, the U.S. bishops haven't always shown themselves to be the wisest organization. After all, hiding away of McCarrick probably was organized by the USCCB itself, since it seemed very systematic in how it operated in the U.S. until the whole thing was made very public in the first decade of this century. They note that they make it Catholic social teaching for the government to do these things. I wrote my doctoral dissertation on Catholic social teaching, so I will give you just a hint here. They're doing is a distortion of Catholic social teaching. The social teaching of the church invokes a word called subsidiarity and another word called solidarity. Subsidiarity means political and economic problems should be handled by the most lowest competent authority possible, meaning the most local competent authority possible. And the most local competent authority is you helping your neighbor. Okay, that's where things should happen. And only when problems are bigger than you can handle should it go up to the next step up and the next step up and the next step up into the authority ladder. And most of these things, the social teaching of the church says, should be handled by the parish or the diocese. It doesn't have any issues with the state doing these things too, but churches are required to do the things that they're invoking to help people. With all that said, the social teaching of the church on the immigration issue says that those who wish to come to a new place need to follow Caesar's laws, including on the laws of entry. This is why this whole thing is just so maddening. They don't follow Catholic social teaching, they just invoke it. Absolutely amazing. Utterly amazing. The church is not against governments doing social programs, but the church says the church should be the one doing them first. And here's the thing. If the church was doing these things themselves, and if the church was actively evangelizing the culture, meaning calling souls to conversion, bringing people into the church, your tithing issues would be taken care of, because your Catholics would have no problems tithing to their church if their parish and their diocese were spreading the gospel, standing up against Caesar when he does evil things, and actually trying to work for the salvation of souls. And then he would take care of these social problems. The churches would be rolling in cash unless they were in a particularly poor area. And they'd be able to help the needy, help the poor. It would reduce the need for governments to do things. But instead, as I've covered in the past on this, the governments, especially in America, got the church to work side by side with it, hand in hand with it, in the development of its social welfare state, going back to like the 30s. Once that money came in, well, the bishops liked the money. And when NGOs get contracts from the government to do things, including Catholic NGOs, when a Catholic NGO takes a government contract, it gives a portion of that money to the diocese that it operates in. So the bishops, when they say they never made a profit off of it, maybe that's true. They never made a profit off of it. But the sole source of funding is usually the government, even if it's from the contract has gotten like a subcontracting situation with another NGO. Money keeps coming in and coming in and coming in, and they like that money because Catholics aren't giving much anymore. So we don't like the things our bishops are doing. It's an uncomfortable thing to say, but who would dispute that we don't like what they do? And the uncomfortable thing in all of this is Pope Leo has himself said things that will fuel this political program. He did it in his very kind of what I would call quietly charismatic way. You're very comfortable listening to everything he says. And so he said things that will fuel this. How he's troubled about the nation states turning their backs on programs for the poor and on migrants and all the rest. It's the situation we're in. Even though you can demonstrably point out, without much effort, that the bishops are violating the teachings of the church. They go back centuries. Aquinas talked about migration, okay, and how you're supposed to respect the laws of where you go, and if you move to a new place, you should assimilate. Aquinas talked about it. To give you an idea of how long this stuff has been something the great minds of the church have thought about. All right, folks, I'm curious what you have to say about this, so let me know in the comments. Please hit like and subscribe if you haven't. It does help. Sharing this on social media helps too. And I'm not trying to make you angry at the bishops. They do a good enough job of that themselves. Pray for them that they have their spirits illumined by God. Their holy that their minds and their intellects are illumined by the Holy Spirit, so that they will actually do the will of God instead of whatever their political opinions are. As always, pray for the church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.